They laughed at us, calling us weak until they pushed us to the brink, and we unleashed the human war machine. Quasar stormed out of the tense briefing, his fist clenched, pulse pounding in his ears. The grim faces of his fellow pack-led resistance fighters said it all. They were out of options, supplies, and time. The Imperium's boot pressed down on their necks, grinding them into dust. In the squalid gloom of their hidden rebel base, a former munitions depot now ruin, Quasar faced a stark choice: surrender to the hated Imperium oppressors who massacred his family, or turn to humanity, the only force to ever defeat the Packleds, for help. Hundreds of light years away, on the bustling human colony of New Anchorage, Staff Sergeant Terry Burns grunted as he sighted down his plasma rifle. The crimson sunset painted the perimeter defenses in bloody hues as the salty tang of ballistic alloy stung his nose. He'd spent his whole career fighting Xenos, but never expected this. Colonel Hawkins himself had ordered Burns's squad back to base on the double. Apparently, long-range scans had picked up a garbled alien transmission, using human encryption protocols no less. Source was a Packled rebel cell on some bleak dirtball called Smoff, begging for human aid against Imperium forces. Command wanted eyes on the ground before committing, and Burns was the lucky bastard tapped to babysit whatever passed for resistance on that miserable mudball. He had no love for Packleds, but one thing burned true in his gut: those Imperium pricks were a galactic plague that needed a hard dose of human vengeance. If these scrappy rebels had the quad to reach out, knowing the bad blood between their kinds, they must be desperate. Maybe helping them was a chance to finally put humanity's boot on the Imperium's neck for a change. So now Burns found himself gearing up for a covert insertion to the ass crack of the galaxy, with only his most trusted squad mate, Corporal Zhang, for backup. Outmanned, outgunned, and out of options. Yeah, this was shaping up to be one hell of a shit show. But the balance of power hung on this Hail Mary play. Time to see if these pack leads could nut up and fight like their lives depended on it. Because the Imperium was about to learn the hard way, what happens when you force humans to pick a side? Game on. The acrid stench of burning propellant and ozone seared Burns's nostrils as the battered rebel transport shuddered through Smoff's turbulent atmosphere. Zhang gripped his restraints, teeth gritted, as the craft bucked and yawed. The ship's alien lines and flickering control panels spoke to its age and hard use. Burns didn't want to guess how many patchwork repairs held the crate together. After a bone-jarring landing, the access hatch hissed open onto a barren, windswept hellscape. Rust-hued rock formations clawed at a sickly green sky choked with Imperium Industria. Burns and Zhang exchanged a grim nod, hefting their gear and stepping into the alien landscape. A welcoming party awaited them, a dozen gaunt figures in threadbare fatigues, tattered remnants of the once proud Packled military. At their head stood Quasar, looking older and harder than his image in the intelligence briefings. His dark eyes held a mixture of desperation and simmering defiance. "Staff Sergeant Burns, Corporal Zhang," Quasar rasped, his voice like gravel. "I'll be straight with you. We need your help, but that doesn't mean we trust you, not after everything." Burns met his gaze unflinchingly. "Noted, but right now, we're the best chance you've got, so stow the attitude and let's get down to business." Quasar's second, a fierce-looking female named Zara, bristled but held her tongue. Burns could feel Zhang's tension beside him, an old enmity hanging thick as smoke. As they moved into the rebels' hidden base, Quasar laid out the grim situation: dwindling supplies, Imperium patrols tightening the noose, and a population teetering on the knife edge of subjugation. Burns listened, assessing, his tactical mind whirring. These rebels had spirit, but spirit alone wouldn't win this fight. They needed a statement victory, something to rally around, and that Imperium supply depot was ripe for the picking. Burns gathered the rebel leadership around a battered holomap. "Here's the plan. We hit the depot hard and fast, strip it of munitions and equipment. Zhang and I will take point, carve a path for your raiders." Quasar frowned. "We've hit that depot before. It's too well defended. By Imperium drones, sure, but not by human marines." Zhang's grin held no mirth. "Time to show you how it's done." The raid was a symphony of controlled violence. Burns and Zhang moved like twin shadows, plasma rifles spitting blue-white death. The rebels followed in their wake, Zara barking orders, seizing crates of precious materiel. In minutes it was over. The Imperium troops lay shattered and smoking as the rebels whooped in disbelieving joy. Burns watched as Quasar clasped forearms with Zara, something like hope kindling in the old warrior's eyes. But even as they savored this first real victory, Burns knew it was just the beginning. The Imperium would respond swiftly and without mercy. General Crandor's cruelty was legendary, even in Burns's Black Ops circles. They had precious little time to hone these ragged rebels into a force that could withstand the coming hellstorm. Burns looked to Zhang, reading the same hardened willpower in his friend's face. No matter the odds, regardless of the cost, they would teach the Imperium the folly of underestimating humanity once again. On this blasted rock, light years from home, they would stand shoulder to shoulder with their former enemies and remind the galaxy why you never backed humans into a corner. Let Crandor come with all his legions and terrors. They'd be waiting, and hell was coming with them. The acrid stench of scorched metal and ozone hung thick in the air as Burns surveyed the smoking ruins of the Imperium supply depot. Quasar's rebels moved with newfound purpose, efficiently stripping the facility of weapons and supplies. The staff sergeant caught Zhang's eye, a wordless exchange passing between them. This raid was just the beginning. Back at the rebel base, Burns hunched over a battered holomap with Quasar, Zara, and Zhang. The flickering blue light cast harsh shadows across their faces as they plotted their next move. The communications relay here, Burns jabbed a finger at the hologram, is our primary target. Take it out and we'll cripple the Imperium's ability to coordinate across the planet. Quasar's dark eyes narrowed. It's heavily fortified. We'd need a miracle to breach those defenses. Zhang's lips curled into a predatory grin. Or a couple of pissed-off human marines. Zara leaned forward, her voice steely. What's the play? Burns outlined the plan, detailing a multi-pronged assault. As he spoke, the doubt in Quasar's eyes slowly gave way to a spark of hope. The night before the raid, Burns found Quasar alone, staring out at Smoff's desolate landscape. The pack-led leader's voice was barely above a whisper. If we fail... Burns cut him off. We won't. The assault on the relay station was chaos incarnate. Burns led the infiltration team, his plasma rifle spitting blue-white death as they breached the outer defenses. Alarms blared and weapons fire filled the air as Quasar and Zara's main force stormed the compound. Inside the facility, Zhang's fingers flew over alien consoles, hacking into the Imperium systems. Burns, I've got something big here. Troop movements, supply caches, everything. A savage smile crossed Burns's face. Download it all. This could turn the tide. The rebels' victory was short-lived. As they secured the relay station, a massive Imperium warship darkened the sky. General Crandor had arrived, bringing hell with him. Incoming! Zara's shout was nearly drowned out by the thunderous impact of Imperium heavy weapons. The ground shook as Crandor's troops swarmed towards the compound. Burns bellowed orders, coordinating a desperate defense. Plasma bolts and laser fire crisscrossed the battlefield as human, and pack-led fought side by side against the Imperium onslaught. Amidst the chaos, Burns saw Zhang go down, caught in a hail of enemy fire. Without hesitation, Zara sprinted from cover, dragging the wounded human to safety as plasma bolts sizzled past her head. The tide of battle shifted moment by moment. Burns watched in awe as the ragtag rebel force, bolstered by human firepower, held their ground against Crandor's elite troops. With a final push, they managed to repel the assault long enough to finish sabotaging the relay and escape with the vital intel. Back at the rebel base, as he tended to Zhang's wounds, Burns felt something shift inside him. The aliens he'd once viewed with suspicion had proven their mettle. These pack-lids were warriors, through and through. Quasar approached, his face grim but determined. Crandor won't stop. He'll burn Smoff to ash to keep control. Burns nodded, his eyes hardened. Then we hit them harder, faster. We use that intel to strike where they're weakest. As Quasar gathered his lieutenants to plan their next move, Burns caught Zara's eye. The fierce pack-led woman gave him a nod of respect, which he returned without hesitation. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The human pack-led alliance had been forged in the fires of combat. Now it was time to take the fight to the Imperium. Burns checked his weapon, a cold fury building in his chest. Crandor and his forces were about to learn just how dangerous it was to back humanity into a corner. The acrid stench of plasma discharge and burnt alloy lingered in the air as Burns surveyed the aftermath of their latest raid. Quasar's rebels moved with newfound efficiency, stripping valuable tech from fallen Imperium drones. The staff sergeant caught Zhang's eye, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. These small victories were adding up, but they needed something bigger. Back at the rebel base, Burns hunched over a flickering holomap with Quasar, Zara, and Zhang. The blue light cast harsh shadows across their faces as they plotted their next move. This, Burns jabbed a finger at a massive structure dominating the hologram, is our primary target, the planetary ion cannon. Quasar's eyes widened. That monstrosity could vaporize entire cities. Zhang nodded grimly. Which is exactly why we need to take it out. Zara leaned forward, her voice steely. How do we breach its defenses? Burns outlined the plan, detailing a multi-pronged assault involving their most elite fighters and newly arrived human special forces. As he spoke, the doubt in Quasar's eyes slowly gave way to a spark of purpose. The night before the raid, Burns found Quasar alone, staring out at Smoff's desolate landscape. The pack-led leader's voice was barely above a whisper. If we fail... Burns cut him off. We adapt and try again. The assault on the ion cannon facility was chaos incarnate. Burns led the infiltration team, his plasma rifle spitting blue-white death as they breached the outer defenses. Alarms blared and weapons fire filled the air as Quasar and Zara's main force stormed the compound. Inside the facility, Zhang's fingers flew over alien consoles, attempting to hack into the Imperium systems. Burns, this encryption is beyond anything we've seen before. A grimace crossed Burns's face. Do what you can, we'll buy you time. The battle raged on multiple fronts. Human special forces worked in seamless coordination with pack-led rebels, their advanced tactics proving invaluable against the overwhelming Imperium forces. For a moment, it seemed they might actually succeed. Then everything went sideways. An Imperium heavy weapons team unleashed a barrage, catching Quasar in the open. Without hesitation, Zara threw herself into the line of fire. The blast sent her flying, her body crumpling against a nearby wall. Zara! Quasar's anguished cry cut through the din of battle. Burns barked orders, coordinating a desperate retreat. Zhang, grab what intel you can. We're leaving. They fought their way out, Quasar cradling Zara's limp form. The ion cannon loomed behind them, untouched and operational, a stark reminder of their failure. Back at their hidden base, the atmosphere was somber. Medics worked feverishly to stabilize Zara, her life hanging by a thread. Burns watched as Quasar paced outside the makeshift infirmary, the pack-led leader's face a mask of anguish and fury. Zhang approached, his expression grim. I managed to pull some data before we bugged out. The ion cannon? It's just one piece of a larger network. Burns nodded, his mind already racing. We need to take out the entire system, but first we regroup and reassess. Over the next few days, a joint human-rebel command council convened. The mood was tense as they hashed out plans for an all-out offensive against the Imperium's defense network. As preparations intensified, the alliance between humans and pack leads deepened. Elite rebel fighters trained alongside human specialists, absorbing advanced tactics and demolitions expertise. In return, the aliens shared invaluable intel on Imperium protocols and weaknesses. But the clock was ticking. General Crandor, enraged by the human intervention, unleashed a brutal bombardment campaign. Burns coordinated a harried evacuation to secret human territories. Rebel and human alike huddled in cramped transports as Imperium weapons fire rained down around them. In the wake of the relocation, tensions mounted. Burns found himself clashing with Quasar over strategy and acceptable losses. The pack-led leader's grief over Zara had twisted into a burning obsession with vengeance. We can't throw away lives on suicide missions, Burns argued during one heated planning session. Quasar's eyes flashed dangerously. And we can't afford to be timid. The Imperium must pay for what they've done. As final preparations for their assault on the defense network got underway, Burns couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The alliance that had been forged in battle now felt brittle, strained by conflicting priorities and the weight of recent losses. Zhang approached, his face etched with concern. You feel it too, don't you? We're balanced on a knife's edge. Burns nodded grimly. One way or another, this next push decides everything. For SMOF, for the rebellion, for all of us. The joint strike teams began to mobilize, loading into transports and checking weapons. Burns watched as humans and pack-leads moved with shared purpose, ready to launch the first salvo in what promised to be the defining battle for SMOF's future. As he boarded the lead assault craft, Burns cast one last look at the ragtag army they'd assembled. Whatever came next, there was no turning back now. The assault began under the cover of SMOF's perpetual twilight. Burns crouched behind a twisted hunk of metal, plasma rifle at the ready. Ahead, the first of the Imperium's defense platforms loomed like a malevolent monolith against the dusty sky. Alpha Team, go, he whispered into his comm. Shadows detached from the rubble-strewn landscape, human special forces moving with lethal grace. Quasar's elite rebels followed close behind, their movements a testament to weeks of intense joint training. The night erupted in a symphony of weapons fire. Burns vaulted over his cover, leading the charge. Plasma bolts sizzled past his head as he sprinted towards the platform's access hatch. Inside, it was chaos. Zhang's voice crackled over the comm, guiding them through the labyrinth of alien tech. 2 levels down, you'll need to overload the main reactor. Burns and his team fought their way deeper, the clangor of battle echoing through metal corridors. They reached the reactor core just as Quasar's team linked up with them. Plant the charges, Burns ordered, taking up a defensive position. The victory was short-lived. As they regrouped outside the smoldering ruins of the platform, a priority alert flashed across their tac screens. Sergeant Jansen's team is dark, Zhang reported, his voice tense. Last known position was Defense Node 7. Burns' gut clenched. He'd known Mira since basic training. Quasar, we need to... The Packlet leader cut him off with a sharp nod. Agreed. We go now. They raced across SMOF's blasted terrain, the sky above them lit by the fires of orbital bombardment. Crandor was lashing out, pummeling rebel positions with indiscriminate fury. The black site where Mira and the captured rebels were being held was a fortress of gleaming metal and crackling energy shields. Burns studied it through his scope, mapping out approach vectors. This is a one-way trip, Quasar growled, checking his weapons. Burns met the Packlet's eyes. Then we make it count. The rescue op was brutal. They breached the outer defenses with demo charges, fought through corridors slick with blood, both alien and human. Burns took a glancing hit from an Imperium pulse weapon, the smell of his own charred flesh filling his nostrils. They found Mira strapped to an interrogation table, her face a mass of bruises. The look in her eyes chilled Burns to his core. Burn them all, she rasped as he cut her free. The exfiltration was even bloodier than the ingress. They lost good people, rebels and humans alike, but they made it out, Mira and the handful of surviving prisoners in tow. Back at the colony base, the cracks in the alliance began to show. Quasar paced like a caged animal, ranting about missed opportunities and the need for bolder action. We should hit their main nexus now, the pack-led leader insisted, banging his head on the holomap projector. While they're reeling. Burns shook his head. It's suicide. We need to stick to the plan, take out the remaining platforms first. The argument escalated, spreading through the ranks. Burns watched helplessly as the carefully forged bonds between human and pack-led began to fray. Then came the news that Quasar had defied orders, leading an unsanctioned strike against Crandor's supply lines. The pack-led returned victorious, but at a terrible cost. Kozlo, one of their most respected rebel commanders, was among the dead. Burns found Quasar alone in the command center, staring at the holographic display of their shrinking territory. This has to stop, Burns said quietly. You're tearing us apart. Quasar's shoulders slumped. I don't know how to do this anymore. So many dead. For what? Burns stepped closer, choosing his words carefully. For a chance, but only if we stand together. A moment of silence stretched between them. Then Quasar nodded, some of the old fire returning to his eyes. What's our next move? As if in answer, alarms blared throughout the base. Zhang's voice came over the comms, breathless with excitement. You're gonna want to see this. We've got incoming, and they're ours. They rushed outside just in time to see the massive human dropships touching down. Colonel Hawkins strode down the ramp, flanked by power-armored troops and crates of advanced weaponry. Looks like you could use a hand, Hawkins said with a grim smile. Burns felt a surge of hope as he watched humans and Packlids alike gathering around the new arrivals. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. All right, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled fighters. Let's show Crandor what happens when you back humanity into a corner. Corner, Burns finished, his voice carrying over the din of preparation. The air hummed with tension as human and Pack-led forces mobilized for the assault on the Imperium's main planetary defense nexus. Colonel Hawkins strode through the ranks, power armor whirring with each step. T-minus 30 minutes, people. Let's make this count. Burns caught Zhang's eye as they geared up. You ready for this? Zhang nodded, triple-checking his tech loadout. Born ready. Let's hope Crandor isn't. As dropships screamed overhead, Burns felt the familiar rush of pre-battle adrenaline. He glanced at Mira, noting the hard set of her jaw. Her time in Imperium captivity had left its mark. Zara, Burns called out, you're with me. We hit the eastern approach. The Pack-led warrior acknowledged with a curt nod, her eyes burning with hardly restrained fury. The initial airstrikes lit up the sky, a dazzling display of destructive power that tore through the Nexus' outer defenses. As the smoke cleared, Burns led his strike team forward, plasma rifle at the ready. They'd barely covered half the distance to their objective when a strange hum filled the air. Burns' tech readouts flickered, then died completely. What the... he started, but his words were drowned out by the thunderous approach of Imperium mechs, their weapons blazing to life. Take cover, Burns roared, diving behind a twisted hunk of metal. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as his team scrambled for shelter. Through the chaos of battle, Burns caught glimpses of the unfolding nightmare. Human armor sat motionless, their crews trapped inside. Weapons fizzled and died in soldiers' hands. And through it all, Crandor's forces advanced relentlessly. Burns! Quasar's voice crackled over the comm, barely audible through the static. We're moving to support your position. Hold on. But as the Pack-led rebels charged forward, Imperium fire cut through their ranks. Burns watched helplessly as Quasar's forces were decimated, unable to provide covering fire with their disabled weapons. Across the battlefield, Mira's voice rang out in desperation. We're pinned down! Our barricades are offline! Burns gritted his teeth, mind racing for a solution. That's when he saw her. Zara, eyes ablaze with tenacity, sprinting towards the heart of the Nexus. Cover me! She shouted, vaulting over a smoldering wreck. Burns didn't hesitate. Zara's making a push. Anyone with a functional weapon, lay down suppressing fire. A ragtag assortment of Pack-led energy weapons and human projectiles erupted, forcing the Imperium troops to duck for cover. Zara seized the moment, disappearing into the Nexus interior. Minutes stretched like hours as the battle raged. Burns and his team fought tooth and nail, using whatever improvised weapons they could find. Just when it seemed their position would be overrun, a familiar hum filled the air. Screens flickered to life, weapons powered up, and in the distance the distinctive whine of human dropship engines grew louder. Technology's back online, Zhang shouted, his fingers flying over a newly revived console. Zara must have taken out their disruptor. Burns wasted no time. All units, push forward. Hawkins, we need air support. The tide of battle shifted violently. Human armor surged forward, guns blazing. Mira's squad burst from their disabled barricades, catching Crandor's forces in a devastating crossfire. As Burns fought his way deeper into the Nexus, he caught fleeting glimpses of the pivotal moments unfolding around him. Zara, her fist bloodied, standing over the fallen forms of Praetor guards. Mira, eyes burning with vengeance, leading a flanking maneuver that shattered Imperium lines. And then, in the heart of the Nexus Control Center, a final confrontation. Quasar and Zara faced off against General Crandor himself, the air crackling with decades of pent-up hatred. Burns raised his rifle, ready to provide support, but Zara's voice rang out. "No! This ends between us." What followed was a brutal dance of violence. Crandor fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, but Quasar and Zara moved with the fluid precision of lifelong warriors. In the end, it was Zara who struck the final blow, her energy blade finding a gap in Crandor's armor. As the Imperium general fell, a wave of silence swept across the battlefield. Then, slowly at first but building to a crescendo, cheers erupted from every corner of Smoff. Burns found himself standing beside Quasar, both of them bloodied but unbowed. Without a word, they exchanged salutes, a gesture of mutual respect forged in the crucible of battle. Colonel Hawkins approached, his armor scorched but intact. "One hell of a fight," he said, surveying the aftermath. "Your people acquitted themselves well, Quasar. We could use allies like you out there." Quasar's eyes narrowed, considering the implications of the offer. Before he could respond, Zara stepped forward, her voice filled with quiet persistence. "First," she said, "we rebuild Smoff. Then we'll talk about the stars." As the sun began to rise on a liberated Smoff, Burns couldn't help but feel a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Human and Packlet alike had forged bonds that would not easily be broken. Jiang appeared at his side, a wry smile on his face. "So," he said, gesturing to the bustling activity around them, "what's next?" Burns chuckled, shaking his head. "One step at a time, my friend. One step at a time." "Tea a time. For now, let's get our people patched up." As the weeks passed, the euphoria of victory gave way to the grim reality of rebuilding. Burns found himself in endless strategy sessions with the Human Military Council, poring over intelligence reports and debating their next moves. "We've got a problem," Colonel Hawkins announced, his face grim as he strode into the makeshift war room. "Imperium reinforcements are inbound. Looks like they're not ready to give up Smoff without a fight." Jiang's fingers flew over his console, pulling up holographic displays of approaching enemy formations. Multiple task forces detected. They're spreading out, likely aiming to establish new footholds across the planet. Burns felt a knot form in his stomach. They'd barely had time to catch their breath, and now this. He turned to Quasar and Zara, who had been observing silently. "Thoughts?" Quasar's eyes narrowed, studying the tactical overlay. "We cannot allow them to dig in. We must strike first, hit them before they can establish a presence." Zara nodded in agreement. "Our knowledge of Smoff's terrain gives us an advantage. We can ambush their advance forces, disrupt their plans." Burns considered their words, then turned to Hawkins. "What about our stealth tech? Could we use it for precision strikes?" A slow smile spread across the colonel's face. "I like where you're going with this, Burns. Jiang, start running simulations. We're going to need a series of coordinated deep strikes." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Burns watched with pride as human and pack-led forces integrated seamlessly. Mira Jansen, her face still bearing the scars of her captivity, took command of a newly formed Spec Ops unit. She worked closely with Zara, melding human tactical expertise with the rebels' intimate knowledge of Smoff's treacherous landscapes. Their first mission came sooner than expected. Burns crouched in the shadow of a twisted rock formation, watching as Mira's team prepared to ambush an Imperium advance force. The rebels had led them through a maze of canyons, right into the kill zone. "Execute," Burns whispered into his comm. What followed was a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. Human stealth technology cloaked Mira's soldiers as they struck from multiple angles. Zara's rebels used the terrain to deadly effect, raining down fire from seemingly impossible positions. The Imperium troops, caught completely off guard, were decimated in minutes. Similar scenes played out across Smoff's outer territories. Burns coordinated from the command center, marveling at the effectiveness of their combined forces. But even as reports of successful ambushes flooded in, Zhang's face grew increasingly worried. "They just keep coming," he muttered, gesturing at the holographic display. "We're bloodying their nose, but it's not enough. We need to cut off the head." Colonel Hawkins nodded grimly. "Agreed. We need to take out their primary logistics hub. If we can sever their supply lines, we might have a chance of breaking this cycle." Burns studied the hologram of the massive Imperium depot. It bristled with defenses, a fortress designed to withstand prolonged siege. "How do we crack something like that?" Zhang's eyes lit up. "I might have an idea. Give me a team and I can blind their sensors, but only for a few minutes." Zara stepped forward, her voice filled with quiet persistence. "My people can get inside, plant explosives, create chaos." Mira nodded, a fierce grin on her face. "And my strikers can run interference. Keep their guards occupied while Zara's team does their work." Burns looked around the room, seeing the purpose on every face. "Let's do it." The assault on the Imperium hub was a symphony of violence and precision. Zhang's cyber attack hit first, plunging the facility into electronic darkness. Zara's infiltrators slipped in like ghosts, planting charges at key structural points. Mira's team created havoc, drawing guards away from vital areas with a series of hit-and-run attacks. When the main assault began, it was overwhelming. Burns found himself in the thick of it, fighting alongside Quasar as they pushed towards the heart of the facility. The pack leader was a force of nature, his battle cries spurring on both human and rebel alike. Then came the explosion that changed everything. Burns saw Quasar stumble, his side torn open by shrapnel, but the rebel leader refused to fall, roaring defiance as he continued to lead the charge. It wasn't until they'd secured the main control room that Quasar finally collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. As medics rushed to Quasar's aid, Zara stepped up, her voice carrying across the comm channels. "Push forward. We cannot let their sacrifice be in vain." The fighting intensified, close-quarters combat in twisting corridors and cavernous storage bays. Burns found himself back-to-back with Mira, their weapons blazing as they cleared room after room. And always, Zara's voice urged them on, coordinating their efforts with uncanny precision. When the last enemy holdout fell, an eerie silence descended on the facility. Burns looked around, taking in the carnage and the exhausted but triumphant faces of his comrades. They'd done it. The hub was theirs. In the days that followed, the impact of their victory became clear. Imperium reinforcements, cut off from their supply lines, faltered and stalled. The seemingly endless wave of enemy forces ground to a halt, giving the battered allies a chance to catch their breath. Colonel Hawkins organized a ceremony awarding medals to both human and pack-led fighters. Burns watched as Quasar, pale but standing, received the highest honor alongside Mira and Zara. It was more than a recognition of their bravery. It was a symbol of their newfound unity. As the formal proceedings ended, Burns found himself surrounded by a mix of human and pack-led soldiers, all raising their glasses in a toast. "To SMOF," Hawkins called out, "and to the best damn fighting force this sector has ever seen." The cheer that went up was deafening. Burns caught Zara's eye across the crowd, saw the quiet pride in her stance. They'd forged something here, something that went beyond mere military alliance. As the celebration continued around him, Burns's mind turned to the future. There was still work to be done, Imperium assets to root out. But for the first time since this war began, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The victory celebration was cut short as Colonel Hawkins strode into the room, his face etched with unbreakable spirit. "We've got a new target," he announced, silencing the chatter. "The Imperium's Central Command on SMOF. Take it out and we cripple their entire operation." Burns felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. He locked eyes with Zara, seeing the same fierce grit mirrored in her gaze. "What's the plan?" Quasar asked, his voice still weak from his recent injuries. Hawkins activated a holographic display, revealing a heavily fortified complex. "Multi-pronged assault. We hit them from all sides, inside and out." Mira Jansen stepped forward, her scarred face set in a mask of concentration. My team can handle infiltration. We'll need Zhang's expertise for a cyber attack. Zhang nodded, already pulling up schematics on his datapad. I've got something nasty cooked up. Just get me close enough. As the war room erupted into a flurry of tactical discussions, Burns found himself shoulder to shoulder with Quasar. The pack-led leader's son, Kuro, hovered nearby, his young face alight with eagerness. This won't be easy, Burns muttered. Quasar's lips curved into a wry smile. Nothing worth doing ever is, my friend. Hours later, Burns crouched in the shadow of a rocky outcropping, watching as Mira's stealth shuttles slipped silently through the night sky. Beside him, Quasar checked his weapon for the 100th time. Infiltration team is go, Mira's voice crackled over the comm. Proceeding to target. Burns took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. All units, prepare for assault. On my mark. The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. Then suddenly, chaos erupted. Human gunships screamed overhead, their weapons blazing. Artillery fire thundered, pounding the Imperium's fortifications. Move! Burns roared, and the combined human rebel force surged forward. The battlefield became a maelstrom of light and sound. Energy weapons crisscrossed the air as Imperium counter-batteries opened up. Burns ducked behind a twisted piece of wreckage, feeling the heat of near misses searing past. We're pinned down, Quasar shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. Their defenses are too strong. Burns gritted his teeth, searching for a solution. That's when Zhang's voice cut through the chaos. Cyber attack successful? Their systems are compromised. For a brief moment, the Imperium's fire slackened. Burns seized the opportunity. Strike team, breach the main gate. Everyone else, push forward. He vaulted over his cover, charging towards the massive fortification. Around him, human and pack-led fighters alike poured through the gap torn in the Imperium's defenses. Inside the command hub, Mira fought with cold precision. Her team moved like ghosts through the corridors, planting explosives at key junctions. Kuro proved his worth, his youthful agility allowing him to outmaneuver the lumbering Imperium guards. Charges set, Mira reported, her breath coming in short gasps. Falling back to extraction point. Burns acknowledged, then turned his attention to the final push. The Imperium commander was cornered, his forces in disarray. With Quasar at his side, Burns led the charge into the heart of the complex. The fighting was brutal, close-quarters combat that left no room for error. Burns felt the sting of shrapnel grazing his cheek, heard the sizzle of energy bolts passing inches from his head. But they pressed on, relentless. When the last defender fell, an eerie silence descended. Burns stood in the shattered remains of the command center, surveying the carnage. The Imperium commander, a hulking figure in ornate armor, lay bound and unconscious at his feet. We did it, Quasar breathed, his voice filled with wonder. Smoff is free. As the realization of their victory spread, cheers erupted from every corner of the complex. Human and pack-led alike embraced, their joy transcending the barriers of species and culture. In the days that followed, a new flag rose over Smoff, a symbol of the partnership forged in battle. Zara, appointed by Quasar to lead the new government, stood tall as she addressed the assembled crowd. But even as they celebrated, a shadow loomed on the horizon. Zhang's face was grim as he approached Burns and Hawkins. Intercepted transmission, he said, holding out a datapad. The Imperium is sending everything they've got. This was just the beginning. Burns felt a familiar tension coil in his gut. He looked out over the sea of faces, human, pack lead, united in purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Kuro's voice rang out, filled with fierce pride. Let them come! We'll show them what humans and pack-led can do when we stand as one. A roar of approval went up from the crowd. Burns allowed himself a small smile. The real test was yet to come, but for now they had hope. And sometimes that was enough. The celebration on Smoff was cut brutally short. Alarms blared across the planet as the massive Imperium armada materialized from hyperspace, blotting out the stars. Burns rushed to the command center, heart pounding as he absorbed the tactical readouts. It's Grand Admiral Shogar, Colonel Hawkins announced grimly. He's brought the entire 7th Fleet. Zara's eyes narrowed as she studied the holographic display. We need to evacuate the cities immediately. Get everyone to the mountain bunkers. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Burns coordinated with Quasar, overseeing the deployment of their meager defenses. The skies erupted in fire as Shogar's ships unleashed their fury. The bombardment shook the ground, shattering buildings and cratering streets. "Dropships incoming!" Zhang shouted over the comm. "They're landing troops in sectors 3, 7, and 12. Burns gritted his teeth. "Mira, take your team and slow them down. We need time to get the civilians out." As evacuation transports streamed towards the mountains, Burns found himself at Hubrin Ridge, directing a hastily assembled defense force. The first wave of Imperium troops crested the horizon, a sea of gleaming armor and heavy weaponry. "Hold steady," Burns ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Wait for my signal." The enemy advanced, their war machines grinding forward relentlessly. Burns watched, measuring the distance. When they entered the designated kill zone, he gave the command. "Fire!" Salvaged Imperium artillery roared to life, their shells arcing through the air to blast craters in the enemy formation. Rebel infantry opened up, pouring suppressing fire into the gaps. For a moment, the Imperium advance faltered. Then Zara's voice crackled over the comm. "Air support incoming! Clear the skies!" Human fighters screamed overhead, strafing the enemy columns. Burns allowed himself a grim smile as he watched the Imperium forces fall back in disarray. But the victory was short-lived. Fresh waves of troops poured from the dropships, seemingly endless. As night fell, Burns received the order to withdraw to the mountain redoubts. "We can't hold them indefinitely," Hawkins explained during a hurried strategy session. "We need to switch to guerrilla tactics, wear them down." Over the next days, Burns led hit-and-run attacks against Imperium supply lines. Mira's team excelled at these operations, striking from the shadows and vanishing before the enemy could respond. Zhang's electronic warfare kept the Imperium forces in constant disarray, feeding them false intel and scrambling their communications. Despite these small victories, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Shogar's forces pushed relentlessly forward, splitting the Allied defenses. Then came the distress call that chilled Burns to his core. "This is Kuro," the young Packled's voice crackled through static. "We're pinned down in Bunker 17. Ammunition low. Can't hold out much longer." The transmission cut off abruptly. Burns turned to find Quasar already mobilizing a rescue force. "I'm going after my son," the Packled leader declared, his eyes blazing with grit. Burns nodded. "I'm with you. Zara, can you provide air cover?" The assault to reach Bunker 17 was the most brutal fighting Burns had ever experienced. Quasar's armor column smashed through Imperium lines, but the enemy's numbers seemed inexhaustible. By the time they fought their way to the bunker, their own forces were nearly spent. They found Kuro and his team making a last stand, using empty weapons as clubs against the Imperium soldiers. The ensuing melee was chaos, human and pack-led fighting side by side in desperate hand-to-hand combat. As they loaded the survivors onto the remaining vehicles, Burns saw the toll the rescue had taken. Quasar's army, once a formidable force, was now a battered remnant. Back at the main Allied base, the mood was grim. Shogar's forces seemed poised for a final, overwhelming assault. Burns looked around at the weary faces of his comrades, human and alien alike. He knew what had to be done. "Listen up," he called out, his voice carrying across the crowded command center. "We've been fighting this war piece by piece, and it's not working. It's time to bring everything we have left for one last stand." As he laid out his plan, Burns saw the spark of hope reignite in the eyes around him. They would gather their scattered forces, pool their resources, and meet Shogar's onslaught head-on. The call went out across Smoff. From hidden caves and secret bases, the last defenders of the planet began to converge. Human technology merged with pack-led purpose as they prepared for the battle that would decide the fate of their world. As dawn broke, Burns stood atop the mountain fortress, watching the Imperium forces mass in the valley below. Beside him, Quasar checked his weapon one final time. Whatever happens, the pack-led leader said quietly, it has been an honor to fight alongside you. Burns nodded, his eyes sharp. The honor is mine, old friend. The first rays of sunlight glinted off the Imperium war machines as they began their advance. Burns raised his hand, ready to give the signal that would unleash everything they had left against Shogar's seemingly unstoppable army. Armada. Burns's hand dropped and chaos erupted. The Allied forces unleashed a maelstrom of firepower, their weapons blazing in defiance against the advancing Imperium horde. The valley below erupted in explosions, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of ozone. Quasar barked orders into his comm, directing pack-led artillery to focus on the enemy's left flank. Human fighters screamed overhead, strafing the Imperium's front lines. For a moment, it seemed as if the defenders might hold. But Shogar's forces were relentless. Wave after wave of troops and war machines pushed forward, absorbing punishing losses, yet still advancing. Burns watched in growing dismay as the Imperium's superior numbers began to tell. "Fall back to secondary positions," he shouted, his voice hoarse from the smoke and debris filling the air. "Mira, I need your team to slow them down." Acknowledgements crackled over the comm as the Allied forces executed a fighting retreat. Burns found himself shoulder to shoulder with Quasar, both firing steadily as they withdrew up the mountainside. "We can't keep this up forever," Quasar growled, his massive frame shuddering as he absorbed a near miss from an Imperium energy weapon. Burns nodded grimly. "We don't have to, just long enough for Zhang to work his magic." As if on cue, the sky lit up with brilliant flashes. Imperium ships in low orbit suddenly veered off course, their weapons firing wildly into empty space. Zhang's voice, tense but triumphant, came over the comm. "Virus deployed. Their targeting systems are scrambled, but it won't last long." The brief respite allowed the defenders to regroup at their final stronghold, a reinforced bunker complex nestled deep within the mountain. Burns strode into the command center, where Zara was coordinating the placement of their dwindling forces. "How bad?" he asked, studying the holographic display of the battlefield. Zara's face was grim. "We've lost over half our strength. Shogar's pushing hard on all fronts." A distant rumble shook the bunker, dust falling from the ceiling. Alarms blared as Zhang's fingers flew over his console. "Imperium ships breaking through. They're targeting—" His words were cut off as a deafening roar filled the air. The bunker shuddered violently, support beams groaning under the strain. Burns staggered, catching himself against a nearby terminal. "Evacuate!" he shouted, gesturing towards the exit. "Everyone out, now!" Chaos engulfed the command center as personnel rushed to escape. Burns saw Zara hesitate, her eyes locked on the tactical display. He grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the door. "There's nothing more we can do here," he said urgently. "We need to—" Another blast rocked the bunker, and the ceiling began to cave in. Burns threw himself over Zara, shielding her as best he could as tons of rock and metal came crashing down around them. When the dust settled, Burns found himself trapped in a small pocket of space, pinned beneath a fallen support beam. Zara lay motionless beside him, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. He could hear muffled sounds of battle outside, punctuated by the ominous creaking of the damaged structure. "Burns? Burns, do you copy?" Quasar's voice crackled weakly through his damaged comm unit. "I'm here," he rasped, coughing as he inhaled dust-filled air. "Zara's hurt. We're trapped in the command center." There was a moment of static, then Quasar's grim reply. "Hold on, we're coming for you." As Burns waited, helpless and immobilized, he could only imagine the fierce battle raging outside. The sounds of combat grew louder, closer. He tensed, wondering if it was rescue or Imperium troops come to finish the job. The grinding of metal on stone filled the air, and a shaft of light pierced the darkness. Burns squinted, making out a familiar silhouette. "Quasar," he breathed in relief. The pack-led leader's face was streaked with dirt and blood, but his eyes burned with tenacity as he surveyed the scene. "Can you move?" Quasar asked, already working to clear the debris. Burns shook his head. "Pinned down. Zara needs medical attention." Quasar nodded, then turned to shout orders to unseen allies. More hands joined the effort, and slowly, painstakingly, they began to extract the trapped humans. As Burns was finally pulled free, he got his first glimpse of the battlefield beyond. The mountain stronghold was in ruins, Imperium forces pressing in from all sides. Pockets of Allied troops fought desperately, but it was clear they were being overwhelmed. Mira appeared at his side, her face a mask of grim dedication. "Sir, we can't hold them much longer. What are your orders?" Burns looked from Mira to Quasar, then to the battered but defiant faces of the human and pack-led fighters around him. He knew what had to be done. "Get everyone you can to the emergency bunkers," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We're making our last stand here." As the remaining Allied forces consolidated their position, Burns limped to a makeshift command post where Zhang was hunched over a salvaged communications array. "Tell me you have something," Burns said, watching as Imperium dropships disgorged fresh waves of troops. Zhang's fingers danced over the controls, his eyes never leaving the flickering display. "Maybe, if I can just—" He trailed off, his focus absolute. Burns turned away, knowing that whatever slim hope they had now rested in the hands of their brilliant tech specialist. The sound of heavy weapons fire drew closer. Burns gripped his rifle, preparing to join the desperate defense. But before he could move, Zhang's triumphant shout cut through the din of battle. "I've got it! Temporary control of their orbital strike system." Burns spun back to face him, hope warring with grim understanding. "How long?" "Seconds at most," Zhang replied, his fingers poised over the targeting interface. "Where do you want it?" Time seemed to slow as Burns weighed the impossible decision before him. The faces of his comrades flashed through his mind, human and packlet alike, united in their struggle against tyranny. He thought of Zara, of Kuro, of all they had sacrificed to reach this moment. With a heavy heart, Burns gave the order that would seal their fate and perhaps change the course of the war itself. "Target our position," he said quietly. "All of it." Zhang's eyes widened, but he nodded in understanding. As his fingers input the final coordinates, Burns turned to face the oncoming Imperium forces. He raised his weapon, a defiant smile playing across his lips. The sky split open, and searing light engulfed the world.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.